Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting over episode 5 of Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So last we left off, the Elric brothers had visited Shao Tucker, who was a sort of leading figure in biological alchemy. But in doing so, they discovered the terrible secret that he had transmuted his wife into a chimera, and later did the same to his daughter. But before any judgment could come to pass, Scar, a figure who had killed other state alchemists, arrived and killed both him and Nina. So things have sort of reached a rather unsatisfying conclusion for the time being. So I have an interesting little scene here of Edward as a child offering a gift to his mother that he transmuted. And it very quickly transitions into a nightmare where Edward is confronted by alchemical monstrosities representative of all of his failures. So it's very clear that he's still highly grief-stricken over what happened to Nina. Which I suppose is a given considering he was essentially yesterday. I don't imagine I'd get over something like that in a very short amount of time. So it becomes very clear that the Elric brothers don't know what happened. And indeed, they only hear from Lieutenant Hawkeye that both Nina and Tucker were killed. At this point, Ed has a lot of questions, and Hawkeye doesn't have the answers. So Hawkeye tries to protect them from seeing the grisly murder scene, but they both seem intent on, I guess, being there if only because they feel they need to set things right. Indeed, given the gravity of the situation, Colonel Mustang himself shows up with a bunch of other state alchemists. So back in Lior, a figure posing as Father Cornello is preaching to the crowds, and he's sort of whipping them up into a frenzy. Of course, we know this isn't Father Cornello because we watched him die. So whatever's going on here is subterfuge of the highest order. And indeed, it seems like violence is on the verge of boiling over. Pretty quickly, the situation devolves, and the city is basically a burning ruin now. So the two figures from before seem to have recruited a third figure to their cause, who was taking the form of the late Father Cornello. And indeed, the way the three figures talk to each other seems to indicate that they aren't human, considering they refer to humans as, well, human, and they do so with great disdain. Additionally, it seems like whatever they're doing, this is merely a small part of a larger plan, and they've got something very sinister indeed planned for the future. Unfortunately, the shape-shifting nature of the imposter Father Cornello was revealed to one of the clergy. Unfortunately, having witnessed this, condemns him to death. And interestingly, these three figures know of Shao Tucker too, and they seem to be surprised by his death. So it seems like they have a fairly intimate knowledge of some of the main characters here, since they name both Edward Elric and Mustang by their, I guess, code names and ranks. So at this point in time, the only thing that the state alchemists know about Scar is the fact that he has a large scar across his face, which serves as his identifying feature. But beyond that, they know he's killed a fair handful of state alchemists. He's very dangerous and very elusive. So Mace Hughes is trying to convince Roy Mustang to take a bigger escort with him for his own protection. But unbeknownst to all of them, the Elric brothers are sort of off on their own and unprotected, which would make them a prime target for Scar, considering Edward is a state alchemist. So Edward's trying to sort of rationalize the horrible experience he's going through with the teachings he learned about alchemy. Essentially how death is merely a part of life, a part of the natural cycle. It is something that is inevitable, cannot be avoided, cannot be bargained with, so it must be accepted. And perhaps understandably, being a child, he's having a rather large degree of trouble accepting it. And indeed, Ed and Alphonse are sort of commiserating about all their various problems. So obviously Ed is suffering, but Alphonse notes that at least Edward can feel the sensation of raindrops falling on his face. So as they're commiserating, Scar happens upon them and asks Ed about his identity. Alphonse intervenes and saves him from what would likely have been a grisly death. So unfortunately, the wall that Edward transmuted was very easily demolished by Scar. And I guess for the first time, Edward's showing some serious fear here, which is something he normally doesn't do. You know, he's pretty, brave, if not stoic, in the face of danger. Of course, I don't suppose he's ever been as hopelessly outclassed as he is here. So it seems like whatever Ed transmutes to get them out of the jam they're in, Scar is able to sort of, neutralize it or counteract it. And Edward's sort of trying to rationalize through what's going on here. You know, he sees no reason why somebody should be trying to kill him. But nonetheless, Scar is chasing him and trying to kill him. So the way Scar speaks, he sort of feeds into what Edward had been talking about before. He says as long as there are creators, there need to be destroyers. Sort of like how there needs to be death to counteract life. The implication being that, while there are alchemists, he will be around to keep them in check, essentially. And I guess it makes sense considering that of all the stuff we've seen him do, it's all been purely destructive. And indeed, he blew a giant chunk out of Alphonse's armor. Although notably, he is given pause when he discovers that Alphonse is indeed an empty suit of armor. So at this point, Scar sort of understands a bit more about what's going on, considering how resilient the Elric brothers are. Alphonse tells Edward to get the heck out of here, but Edward's unwilling to do that. So unfortunately for Edward, Scar sees through what he's doing. You know, he's able to transmute without a circle, so Scar targets his mechanical arm and utterly destroys it. So at this point in time, Edward is totally defenseless. Alphonse can't intervene because he's missing like half his torso. Interestingly enough, Edward almost seems suicidal here because he's not running away or doing anything to defend himself. Edward's trying to sort of bargain here a bit. Like, if he dies quietly, leave Alphonse alone. And Scar is accepting of those terms, unless Alphonse intervenes. So I guess at the very least, Scar is honorable for a murderer. But ultimately, before Edward can be killed, Colonel Mustang and his crew intervene. So, Mustang and Scar have a bit of a clashing ideology here. You know, Mustang is here to arrest Scar for murder, and Scar says, you know, I'm only killing alchemists because they pervert the natural order. So, in a sense, he is arresting alchemists on behalf of God. So Mustang makes a bit of a mistake here by attempting to engage Scar on a rainy day, considering his alchemy relies entirely on, well, essentially not being wet. So it seems Roy got a little bit overconfident, nearly got killed for his trouble, and indeed was only able to survive because Hawkeye intervened. So now we have Armstrong intervening again, and it seems like of all the state alchemists around, he's probably the best match for Scar, since he's currently able to fight, and he's a rather impressive physical specimen on par with Scar. So as Armstrong fights Scar, I guess he manages to make a pretty good account of himself. I guess despite himself, Armstrong causes a fair bit of collateral damage, but he mentioned something interesting in that creation and destruction are opposite sides of the same coin. And having said that, the coin drops for Edward, and he sort of recognizes that Scar is using essentially partial alchemy by breaking something down and not bothering to reconstitute it in a new form. So things are going pretty poorly for Scar. Armstrong manages to back him into a corner. And indeed, no matter what Scar does to try and combat Armstrong, things just aren't going well for him. And indeed, the rest of the military are able to fire on him, sort of pinning him in place. But in doing so, they discover something rather unfortunate. So unfortunately for all involved, Scar manages to effect an escape into the sewers, where he's able to avoid them more proficiently. So Colonel Hughes has now showed up to sort of organize the more dedicated military aspect of things, not wanting to get involved in the battle of the superhumans. But unfortunately for the Elric brothers, their secret is sort of exposed regarding Alphonse's true nature. That aside, the Elric brothers are getting into a bit of a fight here. Alphonse is rather upset at Edward's seeming insistence on dying so easily. So Alphonse makes a pretty good point here. He says that survival is essentially the only way they can make any good out of the horrible situation they're in. If they die, not only can they not fix their own problems, they can't help other people or prevent others from falling to the same fate. So I think there's some nice visual symbolism going on here. You know, their bodies are broken, and indeed so are their spirits. You know, they're in a really dark place right now. And I guess the massive damage done to their bodies is sort of indicative of this. But despite all of that, they still somehow manage to maintain their resolve. So now we come to that plot point about Scar being what they call an Ishvalan. It seems like this was a bit of a bitter conflict going on in Emestris, in the southeast. Seems like there was accidentally some sort of an incident that caused a war, and that war led to a bunch of uprisings, and then after that, a campaign of extermination. A genocide, where the military high command deemed the Ishvalans suitable for extermination, I guess? Or rather, it was deemed they could not be left alive. So all the state alchemists were brought in to bring their alchemy to bear on the Ishvalans. You know, women, children, citizens. Roy Mustang was no exception, and indeed his flame alchemy would have understandably been pretty potent. So, interestingly, Ed is sort of being spoon-fed all this information, but he sort of holds umbrage against Scar, claiming that he's essentially using his religion as a justification for murder, rather than taking justifiable revenge, as Scar no doubt thinks he's doing. And, in reality, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. But, of course, before anyone can really do anything, Ed has to get a new arm built for himself, since his old one was utterly destroyed. So, because he has but one mechanic, this necessitates going back home. Alright, that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.